Hello and welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation with me, your host Owen James, channel that brings you all your latest Rangers news, guys. We're going to talk managers, we're going to talk money, we're going to talk Marathe. Yes, we're going to talk Eminem. You know what? I'd love to talk Eminem. I'd love to talk about. I love Eminem, top rapper, top man. But we're not here to talk about Eminem. We're not here to talk about rap music or Detroit. We're here to talk about Rangers Football Club. Look, we've kind of forgotten this season, haven't we? We've kind of put this season in the dustbin, and we've kind of ready to move on. We're kind of ready to get into kind of next season, aren't we? The off-season mode to start off with, to use an American term of off-season. It's the off-season. But, it's going to be a very intense off-season period with obviously the Champions League qualifiers coming up towards the end of July time. And, it's going to be a pretty tight turnaround in terms of getting the team to a position where we are ready for those Champions League qualifiers. And, I mean, look, it's a long route to the Champions League this time for Rangers. It's 3 rounds to negotiate to get to the Champions League, not just 2, as last time there is an extra round added on because of number 1. We finished second, and number 2, the fact that Scotland's coefficient has dropped, so the automatic qualification to the Champions League has ended. Celtic will also face a playoff round game if they're going to enter the Champions League. Let's hope they get someone really hard and get knocked out, and then we don't have to listen to them going on about it. But yeah, it'll be a tough route. It will be a tough ask to get there. Now, if Rangers are going to make the Champions League, which I really hope they do, because, look, we need the money. We need that 30 million from the group stage, plus the money you make from wins, losses and draws in Champions League phase. The money you get from the Champions League, even, playing and winning or playing and losing and playing and drawing is, well, puts the makes Europa League look like absolute chicken feed compared to what you get in the Champions League. And that's where we've got to be. That's where this club need to be. And I think if you look at the reason the owners have bought this football club, part of the reason obviously is the European football. They're attracted by European football. They want to be part of the European adventure. And they want to play Champions League football, and they know realistically with Leeds United that's not going to happen anytime soon. You look at the Premier League, the top 6, top 8 in the Premier League are fairly well established and very hard to break into, and teams that often come up from the Championship do get relegated straight back down due to the gap between the EFL Championship and the EPL being absolutely massive. Certainly the PSR regulations that are in place there certainly favour the bigger clubs anyway. So look, the situation is such that they want Champions League football. Now, obviously, they've got to get the managerial appointment right. That's the first thing they've got to get right. So who that's going to be, we spoke about on the video earlier, which was the video that I released yesterday, which talked about the fact that, the next manager of Rangers will not have anything to do with the club previously, so that obviously rules out Barry Ferguson, and that rules out Steven Gerrard also as candidates. Like I said on the video earlier, Marco Rosa, Gerhard Struber, are top candidates there for this job. One candidate I did miss off that list was Sean Dyche. I've got to say, I would be absolutely gutted, nay, absolutely devastated if Sean Dyche was to be appointed manager of Rangers. This guy, I mean, honestly, if you thought Philippe Clement's football was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. This guy would make Philippe Clement look like Jurgen Klopp. I mean, he really genuinely would. He plays the most boring, negative, defensive football you have ever seen in your life. His managerial career, yes, I know, albeit in a stronger league with weaker teams, is not great. His record is not great at all. I mean, his win percentage at Watford was 34%. His win percentage at Burnley was 35%. And his win percentage at Everton was 30%. Now, that record of Everton is particularly bad. I mean, people talk about the fact he was parachuted into a relegation battle. Well, yes, fair enough. He was parachuted into a relegation battle, at the end of last season. But he was here at the start of this season as Everton manager. And Everton spent a substantial amount of cash. Always have done. They've never, even though they have not got a great deal of money, they never fail to spend money. That's one thing that Everton will always do. And they have a squad value of around about it's a massive squad value. It's 365 million pounds. That's what that squad is worth. 365 million, which is a considerable amount of money. It really is. And if you look at like their spend last summer. And again, these are players that Sean Dyche was part of, with obviously with Kevin Thelwell. He was part of bringing them in to the club. That was his his reason, his job to do. Now, what did they spend and what did they bring in? Well, they spent last summer. They did spend around about £50 million on players. They spent money on Jake O'Brien for 19 million. They spent 18 million on Ndiaye. They spent 10 million on a guy whose name I really can't pronounce, Eric Boehm. Lindstrom was a loan. So that was this season. That was supplementing players they'd already signed pre-season. From so the previous season as well. Now this squad that they've got, which is worth over 300 million, which features obviously like Ndiaye and Idrissa and Beto and players like that. It was an absolute disaster under Dyche. Yet under Moyes, their record was so much better. Their record under David Moyes has been, Moyes has taken them away from the relegation zone quite easily. And in fact, I think at one point Everton were actually top of the Premier League form table. This was with the exact same squad that Sean Dyche struggled with. And look, I just genuinely think that if Sean Dyche is actually seriously on the list of possible candidates for the Rangers manager's job, this would be an absolute disaster for this club. It really would. It would be a disastrous appointment. Like I said, people are talking about Barry Ferguson's awful win percentages. I mean, 33% as manager of Rangers and 42% overall. Well, Dyche knocks it into a cocked hat. Yes, I know, albeit in a tougher league, but still, like I said, yes, Burnley were a team that's struggled, obviously, in the Premier League. They would do. They're a smaller club. But, Everton, he had opportunity to succeed. And I think, like I said, if you look at Davy Moyes' record with Everton in his second spell, it has been so much better with the exact same players as Dyche had. So, look, at the end of the day, you really would worry, I believe, if he was appointed. I genuinely believe that, I really genuinely would worry about the future with him. Look, so who's going to be the new manager? That's the big question, isn't it? And I think, it's a question that I think it's really hard to answer. It is genuinely difficult to answer that question. And, I read lots of comments. I read all your comments. I don't always reply to them. I try and reply to them when I can. But, I'd say that very much, the candidates that seem to be moving to the forefront at this moment in time is Marco Rosa, and obviously Gerhard Struber as well. And I think personally speaking, you look at it and you kind of would welcome external eyes, someone who comes in afresh, someone who, has worked with a Red Bull system. Now, it does seem from what Parag Marathe was saying about Leeds, and was saying, very much, I think, about Rangers as well in the same token. Yes, the article was about Leeds United, but in terms of installing a transfer trading model, in terms of bringing through young players, developing them and selling them on for big fees, that is very much the Red Bull model. It seems that the 49ers, Enterprises guys, who seem to be the major movers behind this takeaway, yes, and this takeover even, who wouldn't love a takeaway, but a takeover, even with Andrew Kavanagh involved, these are the football guys. They've had experience of obviously managing sports franchises in the States. They've obviously now come over to England, been in charge of Leeds United. As it seems now that it's been reported in numerous sources down here, Marathe is very much involved with the whole takeover process with Rangers at this moment in time. Very busy with that. So, it seems very much that they do want to follow that Red Bull model. And, why wouldn't you? The Red Bull clubs have been successful. RB Salzburg have been exceptionally successful at winning titles in Austria. RB Leipzig have been as successful since they've gone to the Bundesliga in Germany, have qualified for the Champions League, have got to semi-finals of Europa Leagues, yes, and lost to us. But, at the end of the day, it is a successful model. And it does seem that the intention very much is to bring in that trading model, to bring in that way of working, to find those young players, to explore foreign markets, to look all over the world for players, and to kind of develop that a little bit further. So I think that you look at it, and in terms of what the future holds for Rangers transfer wise, it does hold that Red Bull model. And I think, as well, if Red Bull do become involved with the football club, which I believe they will in time, Shirt sponsorship obviously seems to be the start point, but if in the end of the day Red Bull were to invest in the club, I think there could even be some status in that. Red Bull, like I said on the video yesterday, have got a track record of not just owning clubs but putting money in and owning minority stakes in football clubs like Leeds, for example. So overall, you look at it and I think with what Parag Marathe was saying, I think you will see Rangers to really develop and really push that Red Bull-esque, Brighton-esque, Brentford-esque, Bournemouth-esque model of trading, because if we are to generate money, if we are to generate revenue, if we are to bring money in, player sales is a great way of doing it. That is your biggest asset at your football club, is your players. And if you can bring in a young player for say 2-3 million and then develop him, make him better, sell him for 15 to 20 million, 30 million, whatever, you are making a substantial profit which you then can reinvest, and that is the way that the club is going, I believe. Of course, the Niners will obviously start to look for external revenue streams, other incomes, etc., etc. We've seen them already starting to do that. There is already talk of them looking at different ways of bringing in money from other revenue streams, stadium sponsorship, shirt sponsorship, TV deals, or internet deals, things like that, all stuff to try and bring in more money to the football club, which is all positive. The more revenue you bring in, the more money you can spend. You obviously are very much hamstrung by FFP, PSR rules, where the club can only spend within its means, or within a certain loss. And that is obviously governed by the amount of money you bring in. And obviously, as we know, in Scotland the TV deal is shit. The way the league is run is shit. So we need to find other ways of generating income. And Rangers are a global product. They are an absolute global product. And I don't want to talk about them as a product particularly, but that's what they are. That's what we all are in this day and age, in terms of football clubs, whoever you may support. It is global product. Yeah, that's what it is. But in terms of money, look, let's just get one thing straight. I honestly think that I listen to some of the fans and I read what fans have written and I look at what fans are saying about the summer, and you hear some absolutely ludicrous ideas of what's going to happen in the summer. We are one of the richest clubs in Europe now. We are the richest this, the richest that. We're going to spend this, we're going to spend that. Look, that's not going to happen. And it's not because the owners don't want to spend money. It's not because these owners won't want to put money in, like the present board don't want to spend their money, don't want to back the club, don't want to back the manager. We've seen that from the Parks, we've seen that from from John Bennett, etc., etc. Nothing in the 49ers history in terms of the way they run the franchise in America, the way that they operate at Leeds, says that they don't want to spend money, because they will spend money if they need to, if they feel they need to bring in players, to develop playing squads, which they've talked about the need to develop the playing squad at Rangers. They will spend money, but they are hamstrung by how much they can spend. A little thing called FFP will stop them from going completely mental with money. People have talked about all of them coming in, spending 50, 60, 70, 80 million, buying this player, buying that player. It just is not going to happen. I think 20 to 25 million is a far more realistic number. Which then can be obviously supplemented by player sales. Obviously, as you generate more income from player sales, the more you can spend, because then you can obviously set off set by the FFP rules. But obviously, that relies on getting people to buy our duff players. Now, one of the things that I think that Rangers need and that will come under the 49ers is that you will see a better managed, better system for selling and buying players. As it stands at present, we have sold players for huge losses. We have taken hits on players. We have paid players to come off the off the salary bill. We have lent players out and are still paying substantial amounts of money for those players, even though they are not Rangers players. We are wasting money hand over fist at this moment in time through poor board decisions, through poor decisions made at every level of this football club. And I think, under the 49ers, you will see that stop. You will not see us paying other players wages who pay for other clubs because we've loaned them there and they want us to pay 60-70% of the wages. You will not see us paying off players to go. You will not see that happen, because the way of running the club and the development and the scouting will improve. And that's the way forward. But like I said, I think, if you believe seriously that this club's going to spend 50, 60, 70, 80 million this summer, you are living in cloud cuckoo land. It cannot happen. FFP prevents it. FFP will stop it. And, Rangers don't want to fall foul of that. They don't want to be in a position where they're not allowed to play in European competition, where the money is generated, or facing fines from the SFA or point deductions or whatever. You don't want that. I mean, heaven forbid, it is difficult enough to win this league, because of the fact we keep slipping up against shit teams. We don't want to be obviously helping Celtic out by getting docked points. So at the end of the day, I think we've got to have a very realistic sense about what is coming and how this club will work going forward. Guys, let me know your thoughts. What do you think of the managers, the money, the Marathe situation? What do you think of the trading model? What do you think will happen in the future? Look, I mean, we've got people within. I mean, people talk about the present squad. There is assets within the present squad that are sellable. And I'm not talking about the crap ones that we want to get rid of, the Proppers, the Taverniers, the Dessers, etc. of this world, but you've got players, like Nico Raskin, who will go for some substantially more than the 1.5 million we paid for him. Diamonde, I think, in the long run will be worth more than the 3.5-4 million we paid for him. I think we'll have to take a hit on Cortez. But Hamza Igerman will be worth substantially more than the 1.75 we paid for him. So we have got assets there that will bring in funds in the future. Hopefully, I mean, I really don't want to lose any of those players this summer, especially not Nico, for example, who should be the captain next season. But look, there is assets there, and I think that is something we need to continue to develop. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments. On the way out, if you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember always, we are the people.